Hi, I'm Aaron.
And I'm Matthew. And we're back again to talk about more beer styles with you. This time we're going to focus on the American Indian Pale Ale, or American IPA for short. Now, an American IPA is very different from the traditional English-style India Pale Ale.
That's right. Really, right now, American IPAs are all the rage, and it seems these days you can't really start a craft brewery without having a flagship American IPA.
Yeah, they're consistently one of our best-selling, exclusively craft styles of beer. We typically, on a draft system that features 60 or to 80 beers, we'll typically have no fewer than 8 or 10 IPAs on at any one time. Now, IPAs, or American IPAs specifically, are noted for their very, very strong and prominent hop presence. That's the overwhelming characteristic of the beer.
And one of the reasons why we offer so many IPAs and why people like to experiment so much with IPAs are the hops themselves. American hops started out as just a couple different varieties, which really weren't too dissimilar in the first place, has grown to, if you want to have a citric tasting IPA, there's certain hops for that. If you want a nice earthy, I don't want to say dirt, but this nice earthy, salt of the earth IPA, there's a type of hop for that. There's literally hundreds and hundreds of different types of hops. And not only do they have different characteristics, but the mixing of certain types of hops can produce a completely different taste or a completely different smell or characteristic than the two hops do separately.
Sure, and that's one of the reasons why brewers oftentimes consider themselves as more closely aligned with chefs or cooks than they do with engineers, which is how some people tend to think of them, because putting together these recipes and these hop schedules, in particular with the advent of the hop growing industry, which has really taken off in the last 5 or 6 years, there are so many different ingredients and flavors that brewers get to work with now that really the options to brew different types of American IPAs is really kind of limitless.
Yeah, it's almost a mad scientist-like mentality. Well, let me take this and this. Some of these hops don't even have names yet. You'll see on some draft lists special hop number 528, or they'll name the hop the section of where it was harvested.
Sure.
You know, Hill 6, Row 2, I think was one of Russian Rivers or Row, somewhere out there.
Right.
But today we've got Bell's Two-Hearted Ale.
And this beer actually holds a really special place in my heart. When I first started drinking craft beer, I used to drink an IPA and turn my nose up because it was so bitter and so hoppy, and it was just such a foreign flavor to me. And every time I'd go out with my buddies, some of whom were, into beer a little bit differently than I was at the time, they would always try to turn me on to an IPA, and I'd always try and say, no, it's just not for me. I'll take a Doppelbock or a Belgian ale. But one time I finally got a Two-Hearted, and there was something that just clicked. It's like the light bulb went off, and it really started to resonate with me. And since that time, this beer has always been one of my very, very favorites.
Yeah, and now Bell's Brewery, let's talk a little bit about the history of Bell's, because it is a very important brewery in the history of American craft beer. I believe it started in the 80s as Kalamazoo. Was it that long ago?
Yep. Started out as Kalamazoo Brewery. It was founded by Larry Bell. And at the time, it was just a small brewery and brew pub. And it was colloquially referred to as Bell's Brewery. So they ended up actually changing the name from the Kalamazoo Brewery to Bell's Brewery.
And another interesting thing about Bell's Brewery is, and it's not specific to just them, it's specific to a lot of craft brewers, but they do not pasteurize any of their products. So what is pasteurization? Isn't that like milk, is what you're saying yourself? Well, it is. What it does is, depending on the company and the type of beer, if they do decide to pasteurize their beer, they heat it up gradually to a temperature of, I believe, between 140 and 145 degrees to kill all the bacteria that's still in that beer, to make it a little bit more shelf stable. Now, actually all of the macro guys do this. So you're talking the Bud, the Miller, the Coors, the InBev. They all pasteurize their beer. They have for a very, very long time, to make it more shelf stable. The risks of shipping, when you're talking about exposure to light or to heat and to coldness, is mitigated through pasteurization. However, most people are in agreement in that pasteurization can kind of deaden some of the taste of beer. After all, if you have something like this, might be a can conditioned beer or a bottle conditioned beer, you can't pasteurize it because you heat it up that much. It's going to kill all that yeast that's in the bottle that you need, that you rely on so heavily for the beer to continue to develop. I believe there's no living yeast in this one, but still, anything from Bell's is not going to be pasteurized because they want you to have the freshest, most unadulterated product possible. Now, because of that, you also want to keep an eye, as of many things, on the best by or sell by or the freshness date. And this is no exception to that.
Sure. And as is the rule with most IPAs in general, the fresher the better. The hops really kind of will fade out after time, and really it just takes a couple of months before it makes a noticeable difference in the flavor. Now, this beer actually features one type of hop. It's called Centennial hops, which is one of your classic American hops. They call it one of the classic C hops, which also includes Cascade and Columbus hops as well.
Yeah, this isn't my first time with this beer. I'm pretty familiar with Two Hearted. This is, however, my first time having it out of these nifty, cool 16-ounce tallboy cans. If you ever have the choice between drinking a beer out of a bottle or drinking a beer from a bottle or drinking beer from a can, you always 100% of the time want to choose the can. Why is that? Two main reasons. One, it's because no oxygen gets in. Even though the bottle is capped, eventually that cap can fail and it's going to let oxygen leak in, especially if you're keeping it over an extended period of time. But what's so even more of a concern than that is light pollution. It's called a beer being light struck. And I'm not exaggerating, a beer getting light struck can happen within minutes if it's a clear bottle. It doesn't provide any protection from the sun. So no oxygen, no light. It's definitely the best way to consume a beer if you're not having it from draft. And as I'm talking, I can smell this beer when I pour it in.
Yeah, the aromatics have really already opened up. All these hop oils or alpha acids really kind of reside in the head. That's why it's always important to pour a beer from a can or a bottle, for that matter, into a glass. It helps to develop the head, really helps to develop some of these aromas that get locked into the beer. So, speaking of which, let's go ahead and take a look at this one.
Wow.
So we do have some sediments floating around. It is, I describe this as dull to slightly hazy, which is live yeast that's floating in it. As Aaron mentioned, it's unpasteurized, so this is still a live beer. We do have a really nice color, and this is a very typical color for an American IPA. This kind of light amber to deep golden color, some peach highlights. It's actually a really nice looking beer.
For an American IPA, the color is pretty variable, right?
It definitely can be. Some of your East Coast styles will end up being a darker color than some of your West Coast styles.
Okay. So I'm going to finish off this pour.
And right off of the bat on this one, I get lots of bright citrus, lots of bright, juicy, fresh citrus. I mean, there's grapefruit and orange and tangerine.
It's pretty hard to explain because I'm getting a lot of bitterness and a lot of acidity off of it, but it's mouth-watering bitterness, if that makes sense. The bitterness is packaged with a lot of really strong citric scents, citrus flavors. It's very bitter. You smell a little bit of the oil, of the alpha oils, but it's such a bright bitterness. It's a mouth-watering bitterness.
Yeah, it's almost like a juicy type of aroma to it.
Yeah.
And it's also got some nice little layers of some earthy spruce and pine.
I can't believe this is 100% Centennial hops.
Yeah, it really shows you what the layers and the complexity that a hop can give off if utilized correctly by a talented brewer. So,
all right, are you ready to taste this?
Absolutely.
All right. Almost a candied, a sweetness that comes from the hop that's almost a candied taste.
Yeah, like a candied orange peel.
Wow, I haven't had this in a while. This is good.
Yeah, it really kind of takes me back.
Yeah.
This is a beer that will never get old for me. Really great. All that citrus notes that you get from the nose really translate well into the body of the beer. I mean, you still get. I mean, grapefruit I think is really the predominant flavor, and it's kind of a mixture between that almost sweet pink grapefruit and then kind of that bitter, pithy grapefruit flavor to almost like a rind.
Yeah, what strikes me most about, we're talking a lot about the hops, but what strikes me most about Bell's Two-Hearted Ale is the balance that it has.
It does.
Especially when you're hopping your beer with only one type of hop, you've got to make sure you know what you're doing with that malt backbone. And I don't think it would work at all if they didn't have the malt, that malt backbone nailed down just as much as they're tuned in, just as much as they have the hops.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a little bit toasty, a little bit sweet. You get a little bit of caramel, which I really think kind of plays into that bright juiciness of the hops. And perhaps those two combinations working together is what's giving us that kind of candied citrus effect to it. Really nice, and it's hoppy, but it's not overwhelmingly bitter or dry either.
Yeah, it's balanced.
It's absolutely balanced. And even though an American IPA inherently by style is a somewhat unbalanced style, within the context of American IPA, it really doesn't get much more well balanced in this beer. It's kind of a prototype style beer.
It is, and I can see this being a great starter beer for an IPA because it's not smack you in your face multiple times, hoppy. But it's definitely got complexity too. So it's a great all around offering.
Absolutely.
I don't know if we said this or not, but the Two-Hearted, where's it get its name? It's a river, right?
It's a river in the northern peninsula of Michigan. Yep.
Okay.
This one clicks in at exactly 7%.
Yeah, I know that ABV has changed around. They've tweaked the recipe a little bit, as many breweries often do, depending on availability of hops, availability of new hops, new malts. So they tweak it every now and then. And I know this one's been anywhere between 7% and up to 7.5%. I believe. 7.2, I think, was the last iterations.
Despite the changing of the ABV, the flavor always stays excellent and consistent. It's pretty much everything that you could want in an American IPA.
It's very carbonated. I don't know if you can see, but it's very active. It's an active beer. And the carbonation, it kind of gives your tongue this kind of scrubbing bubble type of feeling that really makes you, it scrubs your palate, cleanses your palate, makes you just want to take sip after sip after sip.
Now, this is a beer that to a certain degree will sell itself. It does have a lot of name recognition. It has been around for a little over 20 years at this point. It has great distribution, particularly up the eastern coast of the United States. It kind of sells itself. However, this is always a great recommendation for somebody that's really trying to get into craft, okay? If you've got a brand new brew crew member that's been working their way through the lagers and through the wheat beers and some of your more accessible styles of beer, and maybe they've ran out of wheat beers to try in your store, but they still want to get their points, it's a great beer to turn somebody on to a new style of beers, because this is it'll kind of kick the door open to the style. And once that door is kicked in, the possibilities are endless. I mean, there's hundreds of great IPAs available on the market, and this is a great one to start somebody with. If they're intimidated by IPAs, give them this one. It's not as intimidating as many of the others. It's not a hot bomb per se. And as Aaron mentioned before, it's got really, really nice balance and well-adjusted flavors.
Yeah, so if you've never had it before, go out and try it. And if you have had it before, go out and pick up the new 16-ounce can formats. They're pretty nifty. And if you're somewhere on the West Coast watching this and you don't have Bell's distribution out there quite yet, I don't know if Arizona does. I think they don't at this point in time. But I know they're either just finished an expansion or they're planning on expanding. So you should be able to get it pretty soon.
All right, cheers.
Cheers.